You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 13th of September 2013. NHS death rate, one of the worst in the West. 9 men accused of sex attacks on girl, 14 released. Migrants wrongly allowed into the UK, watchdog warns. UKIP MEP quits in split with totalitarian Farage. Denmark, Hamas TV to broadcast from Copenhagen Mosque. No Dutch protection for Egyptian Christians. Italy to slash military personnel by 20%. Germany, Muslim schoolgirl loses swimming class appeal. Nick Griffin MEP today talking on Euro arrogance and the experience of a prisoner of the Syrian rebels. Africa's population set to double by 2.4 billion by 2050. Brotherhood imposes jizya tribute on Egypt's Christians. 2 million bikers roar into DC to honour 9/11, protest Muslim rally. Thought for the day, change versus enrichment. And finally, the long and short of it. Dear listeners, keep the comments coming, but try to listen all the way through, as some comments can state facts that I have already covered towards the end of my thoughts. You can't always go on the bullet points alone, they are merely headings. UK news. NHS death rate, one of the worst in the West. Sophie Borland of the Daily reports death rates in NHS hospitals are among the highest in the Western world, shock figures revealed recently. British patients were found to be almost 50% more likely to die from poor care than those in America. They have 5 times the chance of dying from pneumonia and twice the chance of being killed by blood poisoning. Experts say that, despite recent improvements, NHS death rates still outstrip those in many other European countries. World at 8 says, this settles the hash of a very self-satisfied Straits-born Chinese nurse who told us in her first words after my husband's heart attack that had he been in the States he would have been dead. Stupid woman. I would have liked to have asked her why she came over here when they need nurses in Singapore. 9 men accused of sex attacks on girl, 14 released. 9 men accused of sex attacks over 6 months on a 14-year-old girl walked free from the Old Bailey today. The case collapsed when police discovered the contents of the alleged victim's old Twitter account. The alleged victim, now 15, made a statement to the police in November last year detailing horrifying sex attacks, mostly rapes, stretching back to May 2012. The men, Desmond Aguiye, 23, Edward Kofi Edunya, 23, Perry Murray, 24, David Sarpong, 23, Adedeji Atidebaby, 21, Austin Odisi, 24, Justin Maynard, 23, Olanre Waju Sonde, 24 and Tamsanga Sibanda, 30, had originally been charged with 28 offences. They'd been due to stand trial last week, but at the last moment the prosecution revealed that the Twitter account had come to light. Judge John Bevan QC adjourned the case until today and granted all the defendants bail. Today, Samantha Cohen, prosecuting, told the court, a review of the Twitter material has been conducted at the highest level of the Crown Prosecution Service and the police in conjunction with trial counsel. The unanimous conclusion is that there is no realistic prospect of conviction in respect of any defendant on any of the counts. For that reason, the Crown is offering no evidence across the board in this case. The judge entered not guilty verdicts on all the charges and discharged the defendants from the dock. World at 8 says, did she have sex with the men or were they falsely accused? If she had sex, no matter how much she led them on, they should have been charged with statutory rape. But of course they aren't old white guys, are they, with drinking problems? Migrants wrongly allowed into the UK, watchdog warns. Tom Whitehead, security editor for The Telegraph, writes, hundreds of migrant workers may have been wrongly allowed into the UK because of bad decisions by immigration officers, a watchdog has warned. The review is the latest in a series of highly critical reports by the watchdog on the immigration system. 1 in 3 applications for an entrepreneur visa examined by John Vine, the Chief Inspector of Borders, was wrongly granted, his report concluded. He signalled the problem may have been created by an urgency to clear a new immigration backlog of 9,000 cases which emerged last year when applications for entrepreneur visas increased 16-fold in just 10 months. The scale of wrong decisions could even be worse because it was impossible to judge whether correct decisions had been made in almost half the cases examined due to poor paperwork, the report said. Mr Fine also criticised the discovering of crates of files containing sensitive information from applicants in an open plan office in Sheffield. The review is the latest in a series of highly critical reports by the watchdog on the immigration system. World Today states it's the wrong decision to let anyone into the UK now in the first place. Soon even the migrants won't want more migrants. UKIP MEP quits in split with totalitarian Farage. A senior UKIP MEP has quit in protest at Nigel Farage's totalitarian leadership in the second significant exit in a month. Mike Nattrass, the former deputy leader, has been involved in a High Court dispute with the party hierarchy over his deselection as a candidate at next year's European elections. He claimed only cronies of Mr Farage were being picked to stand. It follows the departure in August of Will Gilpin, the party's chief executive, who said the party's reluctance to accept professional management means UKIP will remain a bunch of enthusiastic amateurs. Mr Nattrass told Channel 4, "I belong to a party that is now totalitarian and it will not let the voters speak because not only have they decided who will stand, they have also decided that the party members who should have a free vote will not get a free vote." Mr Farage is an excellent frontman but a very bad leader, said Mr Nattrass, who could stand as an independent next year. He only wants people in the party who absolutely and totally agree with him, so I'm regarded as a troublemaker. A UKIP spokesman said the High Court had ruled the UKIP selection process was fair. Mr Nattrass is the second UKIP MEP to leave the party this year. In February, Marta Andreasen defected to the Tories in response to David Cameron's offer of an in-out referendum on EU membership. She said Nigel Farage's leadership is dictatorial. European news. Denmark. Hamas TV to broadcast from Copenhagen. A new mosque in Copenhagen may break anti-terror legislation if it allows Hamas-controlled Al-Aqsa TV to broadcast from its premises. Hamas-controlled TV station Al-Aqsa TV will broadcast from Copenhagen's new mosque, according to the media spokesperson of the Muslim organisation Dansk Islamist Råd. Hamas is recognised as a terror organisation by the EU, and because Al-Aqsa is owned and operated by the group, their broadcast from Denmark may break anti-terror legislation. The 6,800 square metre mosque on Rovningsgade in the Nordvest district is Denmark's largest and was built using a 150 million kroner donation by the former ruling emir of Qatar, Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. The news that Al-Aqsa would be broadcasting from the mosque confirmed the fears of Lars Aslan Rasmussen, a member of the City Council and spokesperson for the city's Social Affairs Committee. A few weeks ago, Dansk Islamist Råd said that there would be no connection to Qatar, and we can now see that is a lie, Rasmussen said. World Today comments, "You're dealing with liars and deceitful people. It is the language of Islam, covered in syrup, with the poison underneath." No Dutch protection for Egyptian Christians. The Cabinet sees no reason in the present situation for a special asylum scheme for Coptic Christians from Egypt. There is no question of an organised religious cleansing. Dozens of churches and other properties of Christians in Egypt have been set on fire in the past week. Small Christian party Christen Uni wants the Cabinet to make more specific efforts on behalf of the Coptic religious minority, for example by designating them a risk group as part of asylum policy. They would then be able to obtain temporary asylum in the Netherlands more easily. But the Cabinet is not in favour for this now and is also not prepared to relax its visa policy. Timmermans says in his letter that individual Egyptians have used the unrest to commit violent acts against Christians, but that it cannot be established with any certainty that there is organised violence by political movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood. The attacks against this Christian minority are unacceptable, but there is no question of an organised religious cleansing. World Today states, Islam is laughing at Europe. There is Sweden taking thousands of Syrian rebel families, and yet the Dutch can't make allowances for Christian refugees from Egypt. These idiots should just convert and go and live in Saudi with all the rest of the Euro Muslims. See how they like that. Italy to slash military personnel by 20%. Defence Minister calls unprecedented restructuring epochal. Italian Defence Minister Mario Moro announced on Tuesday that Italy will slash its military personnel by 1/5 in an unprecedented shift of public spending priorities. There will be a reduction of the personnel in the armed forces of about 20%, Moro said. He called the restructuring of the military an epochal process in which the armed forces must reckon with the conditions of public finances and the state budget. World date. It looks like everyone except Germany is reducing their armed forces. We've been warned twice before the last 2 wars and have not listened until too late. Germany, Muslim schoolgirl loses swimming class appeal. Muslim schoolgirls cannot skip swimming lessons on religious grounds, one of Germany's top courts ruled on Wednesday. The ruling was sparked by a case involving a Muslim girl who argued she should not have to take part in swimming classes because she would see bare-chested boys in their swimming trunks. The 13-year-old from Frankfurt am Main took the case to Germany's top administrative court, the Federal Administrative Court in Leipzig, after losing the case at a court in Kassel, West Germany last year. Judges in Leipzig said the girl could wear a full-body swimsuit known as a burkini to help maintain her religious beliefs. The girl claimed the right to skip the classes, with her lawyer arguing that according to the Koran she was not only forbidden from showing herself to boys but also from seeing the topless boys. The parents of the girl, whose family comes from Morocco, first complained 2 years ago that the Muslim girls should not take part in co-educational swim lessons, but the school rejected the complaints, prompting the court cases. World Date states, "These Muslim children should be in Muslim schools in Muslim countries. When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Belly of the Beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP, who talks today about crazed Euro arrogance and the first English translation of an account of an Italian journalist's experience as a prisoner of the Syrian rebels.
My Strasbourg week this time was a crazy whirl of meetings, votes, interviews, including a long one with RT, and up against the clock office work. The most notable votes were a succession of shockers on Thursday, when the out-of-touch mini-emperors of Europe gave thumping majorities to a massive extension of the powers of the European Central Bank in a radical shift towards total fiscal union, and then pushed a whole lot further towards the creation of a common European army. Then they rounded off a merry hour's voting by approving the Gomes report, which commits us all to the creation of a European navy, equipped partly with what remains of ours. Now, I like Spain and the Spaniards a great deal, but to have a second-rate Spanish politician settling scores for the destruction of the Armada in 1588 by scuttling our Royal Navy is just too much. Drake really should be awake and beating his drum. The fact he isn't yet suggests that things are scheduled to get a whole lot worse before we get to make them better. Or perhaps Sir Francis is already wide awake, but the BBC have done an interview with him and decided not to use it in case it offends Madrid. Among my various writings this week was a piece for our website about how the BBC, and indeed the whole rotten shower of the UK's controlled media, had failed to report the astoundingly relevant case of Italian-German journalist Domenico Quirico and Belgian teacher Pierre Piquenin. The 2 men were held as hostages by the Free Syrian Army for 5 terrifying months before being released last week. Their testimony that they heard their rebel captors discussing the fact that the terrible poison gas attack in Damascus was their work, done in order to bring the West into the war on their side, is one of the best pieces of evidence as to who is really to blame for the massacre. The more so since the 2 went to Syria as firm supporters of the rebels and continue to be bitter critics of the Assad government. But it was only 2 days after we became the first recognised media outlet in Britain to publish their shocking account that the controlled media, in the shape of the Daily Mail to start with, caught up and belatedly published this devastating blow to the Obama regime's common sense belief that Assad woke up on the morning of the 21st of August and decided to commit suicide by Tomahawk missile. Better late than never, but so far no mainstream media outlet has published Quirico's gripping account of life as an Islamist hostage. It was printed in the Italian newspaper La Stampa. So since the controlled media obviously want to keep us in the dark as far as possible, I've polished up a rather erratic automatic translation for you. So here it is, with due acknowledgements to the author for a fine piece of journalism that rather reminds me of George Orwell's brilliant account of his experiences and disillusionment with communism during the Spanish Civil War. Homage to Catalonia. So I'm going to conclude this week's broadcast by reading from his article, since it puts a human-scale perspective to the warning that the rebels who Cameron and Haig still want to arm and bomb into power in Syria are not the good guys, but rather a virulent, brutal strain of a virus that threatens everything we hold dear. I thought they would kill me. Syria is in the hands of the devil. By Domenico Quirico. The night was as sweet as wine. April the 8th, and we were in Al-Qusayr, Syria, to tell another chapter in the Syrian war, where the Spring Revolution seemed to last forever and give hope of changing the world. But instead, there were to be 152 days of captivity, in small dark rooms, fighting against time, fear and humiliation, hunger, abuse, and 2 mock executions, 2 failed escapes, and cut off from God, family, others, cut off from life itself. Hostages in this Syria of the betrayed revolution, the revolution that has now become fanaticism and the work of bandits. The hostage cries, and those around laugh at his distress, viewing it as evidence of weakness. Syria is now the country of evil, where evil walks and triumphs, swelling like fat dark grapes on vines beneath the eastern sun. Evil in all its guises: greed, hatred, bigotry, a total lack of pity or mercy. A place where even children and the elderly rejoice in being bad. My captors prayed to their God, right next to their battered prisoner. Smug and without remorse, they kept to their rituals. What did they say to their God? We had entered Syria on April the 6th with the consent and under the protection of the Free Syrian Army, just as we had several times before. Our aim was to reach Damascus and see for ourselves the drama of the decisive battle of the Civil War, because that's how I work as a journalist. But we were told that we would have to wait a few days before heading to the capital, so we agreed to the proposal that we should go to a town called Al-Qusayr, near the Lebanese border, which at the time was besieged by Hezbollah, a staunch ally of the Assad regime. We arrived at Al-Qusayr with a Free Syrian Army supply convoy, a long journey into the night, through the mountains without headlights, because regime forces controlled the road. Near the ancient Byzantine mill of Tikhanen, we were shut up by a MiG. The city was already devastated, destroyed by aerial bombardment, so we decided to go back to where we'd started to see if we could get to Damascus from there. But now trust turned to betrayal. They had decided to sell us. As we left the ruined town, we were confronted by 2 pickup truckloads of armed and masked men. They forced us into their vehicles, took us to a house, and beat us repeatedly, claiming to be Assad's police. But as the days passed, we realised that wasn't true, because there were fervent Islamists who prayed 5 times a day to their much vaunted Allah. On the Friday they listened to the sermon of an imam who supported the jihad against Assad. The final litmus test was when we were bombed by government planes. It was clear that we were being held hostage by the rebels. The founder and leader of the group, holding us, is a self-proclaimed emir who glories in the nickname Abu Omar. He formed his brigade from local recruits, mostly bandits and Islamist revolutionaries. He uses Islamism as a cover for criminality and collaborates closely with the group that later took us over as prisoners, Al-Farouq. Al-Farouq is a well-known brigade of the Syrian Revolution. It is part of the Syrian National Council, and its representatives meet European governments. It was created by a renegade general who enlisted fighters from among the poorest people in Homs, among those most neglected by Assad's mafia regime. Western politicians trust them, but I learned the hard way that this is a group that embodies a new and alarming phenomenon in the Syrian Revolution: the emergence of gangs of Somali-type Islamist bandits who use the revolution as cover to seize control of territory, take what they want, and line their own pockets. To start with, we were kept in a country house on the outskirts of Al-Qusayr. But after about 20 days, Hezbollah attacked the rebel positions, and the house that had been our prison suddenly became the front line. It was bombed and attacked. We were moved to a house within the city, but it too was attacked, and we were taken and handed over to a brigade of the Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda in Syria. It was the only time we were treated as human beings, in some respects even with sympathy. For example, we got to eat the same things that they did. The Al-Qaeda fighters live a very ascetic life. They live as warriors, radical Islamist fanatics who seek to build an Islamic state in Syria and then throughout the Middle East. But against their enemies, and we, Christians, Westerners, we are their enemies, they have a sense of honour and respect. But then we were handed back to Abu Omar. After the first day's march, Abu Omar was sitting like a pasha under a tree, surrounded by his little court of guerrillas. He called me over to sit next to him. He wanted to pretend to be our friend and to chat to these two Westerners, dressed in rags and broken by 2 months in captivity. I asked for his phone so I could call home, saying that my family probably thought I was dead and that it was destroying my life. He laughed and showed me his phone, lying that it had no signal and that I couldn't call. It wasn't true. But at that moment, a Free Syrian Army soldier, wounded in the legs, pulled from his trouser pocket a mobile phone and gave it to me right in front of his warlord. It was the only gesture of human compassion that I received in 152 days. No one else showed a shred of what we call compassion or mercy. Even the old and the children tried to harm us. It may sound a bit too religious, but really, I found in Syria the country of evil. I was able to call home for only 20 seconds. I heard a desperate scream on the other end of the line, and then the call dropped out. We were kept like animals, forced into small rooms with windows closed despite the terrible heat, thrown off mattresses, given the remains of their meals to eat. In all my life in the Western world, I have never experienced such daily humiliation in simple things such as not being able to go to the toilet, having to ask for everything, while always fearing you'll be told no. I think they got real satisfaction from seeing the rich Westerner reduced to being a beggar, a poor man. After we tried to escape, we were locked in a kind of cupboard, with our hands tied behind our backs, almost unable to move. They kept us like that for 3 whole days. But we had value as a commodity. You can't destroy the merchandise, or you won't get its price. You can kick, but you can't kill, because then you can no longer sell. It's a horrible law of hostage-taking. Our jailers were a group that claims to be Islamic, but is actually made up of young misfits who entered the revolution because it is now all about these groups that are halfway between banditry and religious fanaticism. They follow them for the promise of a future, because they give them weapons and power, the money to buy mobile phones, computers, clothes. Adidas is widespread in Syria. They all have Adidas t-shirts, Adidas shoes. It looks as if there's some kind of sponsorship. And they smoke Marlboro Original American that they get from Turkey. Twice, they pretended to put us up against the wall for execution. One approached me with a gun, showed me it was loaded, and told me to put my head against the wall. Then he held the gun to my temple. For endless, agonizing seconds, you feel ashamed. I remember the mock execution of Dostoevsky. You're torn between rage and fear. He's so close you can feel him breathe, exuding the pleasure of having in his hands the fate of a man he knows to be afraid. And you're angry because you're afraid. It's a bit like children, who are often terribly cruel, ripping the tail off a lizard or pulling the legs off insects, the same terrible ferocity. To laugh at us every now and again, our captors told us, in 2 or 3 days or a week you'll be free and off home to Italy. Just to see our despair, because they would add the words, Inshallah, God willing, because that's their way of lying without lying. Inshallah. They kept saying Bukra, which means tomorrow, but the next day nothing would happen. It was a really cruel game, but after a while, when they played it, we in turn would reply, Inshallah, to show that we understood. I'm a believer. Mine is a very simple faith, the faith of the prayers of my childhood. Simple, but profound. My faith is giving. I don't believe God is a supermarket. Do not go to discount stores to seek pardon. This faith helped me to resist and survive, to tell the story of 2 Christians in the world of Muhammad, and to compare the 2 faiths, my simple faith of giving and love, and their faith, which is all ritual. I also had one of my notepads, and every day I recorded what had happened. I was almost done. There were only 2 pages left. I've been counting the months, the days, because if you lose the sense of time, you feel you're sinking into a pit from which there is no escape. Domenico and Pierre did escape, or rather their captors sold them back into freedom. Whether Syria can escape from the clutches of the same New World Order-backed Wahhabi terror gangs, of course, depends largely on Russia, which appears to have decided that it's better to fight this world-eating cancer in Damascus than waiting for it to reach Moscow. But American and British public opinion may also decide the outcome, and that's something that we, indeed you, can and must help influence. So if you've enjoyed this show, show your appreciation, please, this time, not by sending a donation, but by spending another 25 minutes online right now to help argue for peace and against a Western attack on Syria. The comments sections of American newspapers are particularly important, and you can access them through thepaperboy.com. There are still a few lame ducks out there quacking their call for other people's blood and taxes for an attack on Syria. Go give them both barrels.
Thank you, Nick. Fascinating as usual. And thanks very much for taking the time to send this to us. World news. Africa's population set to double to 2.4 billion by 2050. Tom Gardner of the Daily Mail writes that Africa's population is set to double to more than 2.4 billion over the next few decades due to improved healthcare and medicines, a new study found. Sub-Saharan Africa, the world's poorest region, will record the largest amount of population growth of any area in the world between now and 2050, according to the Population Reference Bureau, PRB. But the massive baby boom could put huge strain on resources and fledgling economies in some of the world's most deprived areas, they warned. The 10 countries worldwide with the highest fertility are all in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, women in sub-Saharan Africa average 5.2 children, a rate that rises as high as 7.6 in Niger. And improved access to medicine and healthcare meant millions more of these children will now survive to adulthood. Brotherhood imposes jizya tribute on Egypt's Christians. Now that the attacks on Egypt's Christian churches have subsided, stage 2 of the jihad, profiting from the fear and terror caused by stage 1, is setting in. Reports are emerging that the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters are forcing the roughly 15,000 Christian Copts of the Dalga village in the South Minya province to pay jizya, the money or tribute that conquered non-Muslims historically had to pay to their Islamic overlords with willing submission and while feeling themselves subdued to safeguard their existence, as written in Quran 9.29. According to one priest from that area, all Copts in the village, without exception, are being forced to pay tribute, just as their forefathers did nearly 1400 years ago when the sword of Islam originally invaded Christian Egypt. He said that the value of the tribute and method of payment differ from one place to another in the village, so that some are expected to pay 200 Egyptian pounds per day, others 500 Egyptian pounds per day. Thanks to Raymond Ibrahim of the Jerusalem Post for laying it out so succinctly, just look at how the only reference World at 8 could find in Western media tells the story of jizya. Yahoo News says, those who remain pay armed Muslim neighbours to protect them. Ioannis said his brother paid a cow and a water buffalo. Most Christian businesses have been closed for weeks. World at 8 says, now that all dovetails nicely with the previous story that the Dutch and most of the Western world don't believe the Copts are being persecuted. One day it'll be truly lovely for these non-believers in a Muslim Europe. 2 million bikers roar into DC to honour 9/11 protest Muslim rally. Thousands of bikers from around the country roared into the DC area on Wednesday in a show of support for September 11th victims and in solidarity against a controversial Muslim rally on the Mall. The 2 million bikers to DC ride might have fallen short of 2 million strong, but the numbers were impressive. A line of shining chrome and steel bikes stretched about a third of a mile from the starting point at the Harley-Davidson of Washington store just outside the district in Prince George's County. The bikers began departing from the store at about 10:30 in a staggered groups of 50, stopping for traffic lights and taking an hour or so to get onto the road. The ride was complicated by the fact that federal and local authorities denied a permit that would have offered the riders a police escort through traffic, a sore spot with organisers who thought the denial was for political purposes. World at 8 comments: the fact these guys did it without any help from the authorities, and in fact were hindered by them, is a feat indeed. I would have loved to have been there, as I'm a biker girl at heart. Good on these men to show some respect for 9/11, which was perpetrated by Muslims, and in view of all the bums in the air from the Muslim entourage, which was oddly encouraged by the authorities. Thought for the day: change versus enrichment. Now, I'm all for change and progress, in fact anything that improves the look of a country and social adhesion for its people, but no one can convince me that massive immigration by whatever race or culture alien to our own is good for our people or society. I'm addressing a vast swathe of Brits who probably won't even hear me, but the people I'm talking about are the products of the baby boomers and also their offspring if they have any. People who don't live in heavily enriched areas or regions, those who have cheap handymen and cleaners from Eastern Europe or Thailand, who have Chinese and Indian takeaways more days than they cook, who maybe can pay to have their children educated well away from the children of the people that they employ, and who regularly donate to starving in Africa and let everyone know they're doing it. It's these people, probably from my tribe, who are the deadliest of enemies of nationalism in all its various forms. They have no time for patriots because their lives must not change. Their homes are their castles, and due to hard work I for one don't resent them. What I do resent is their never changing attitude and the almost dim-witted way they can ignore the most awful of events completely. These are the people who pass by on the other side when something kicks off. They don't want to know and they don't want to have anything to do with anything about anything. It's a form of mental laziness or obtuseness that I have never understood. In the good old days when people knew their place, and I can hear the groans now. Of course there never were such days for some. Their days were filled with misery and hard work and no money for food. But they had something the British public don't have today: pride and nationalism. Even if they voted Labour or Communist, they did so for a cause. Not a cause I would share, but a cause nonetheless. These are the people who hold office in the law, government and local councils. These are the people who should see what is going on around them and do something about it. But they aren't, and you have to ask yourself why. I believe it's because after the last World War something clicked in the Western mind and was brought to fruition by propaganda in education and the media that anyone who loves their country to the exclusion of starving natives is automatically a fascist, pure and simple. This argument, like the racist response, immediately wrong-foots the person with national pride and opens the door wide for the so-called liberals, who are in fact nothing more than communists in liberal clothing. Liberals love everything that is not of their own country or people. They revel in different cultures, but unlike our Victorian or Edwardian ancestors, they don't want to go abroad to do it, but stay home and make their homeland another home from home for millions of strangers and their descendants. Not a thought is given from these people to their country of birth, their culture and their history. All can vanish in the name of democracy, multiculturalism and love for what they see as their fellow man. Now, in the days of old, most of these fellow men would have killed an Englishman on sight, and plenty did. Many of the ancestors of these people did die in foreign lands. Now, whether they were exploiting the natives or bringing health care and the word of God is irrelevant, and believe me, anything is irrelevant when your head is sticking on a pole and your last sight is some native waving said pole. But all that is forgotten, because that is what we English do so very well: forget. We are past masters at forgetting all the bad and remembering all the good in general feelings and days of soppiness of which our ancestors would have totally ignored. We have become a nation of whingers and whiners, with as much backbone as a jellyfish. And who is to blame? We are. We've let our figures in authority run rings round us mentally since World War II. It's taken a form of subtle yet insidious laws and an even greater form of propaganda through the television. The amount of social engineering that's gone on is enormous in this country alone. Don't be fooled. All this advertising certain ways of life, thinking and even bringing up your children is all planned social engineering and all geared to us accepting and even welcoming massive amounts of foreigners into our midst on a regular basis. New roads, new airports, new houses, not for us, but for the lovies and their latest hobby, the destruction of England. You don't need to be a patriot to see what has happened in this country. We are being overrun, and it is being done much quicker than official stats tell us. London is now filled with shabby ethnic majorities all jockeying for space. Many of our schools, even outside our once capital city, have only immigrant children in them and English is not spoken. There are riots and troubles throughout this land which are ignored when instigated by ethnics, but not ignored when perpetrated on occasion by a white guy or guys. There are cases of certain ethnics creating ghettos in what were once white areas and being allowed to do so, in fact encouraged to form large communities which perform in direct opposition to what once were English populations. It's rare to see certain migrants enjoying a restaurant meal or a cinema, theatre or club. They may wheel their copious amounts of children around, but rarely do they actually input any finance or any amount back into our economy, no matter what the government might say. Most have their own shops and businesses, all of which take out from this country, not put in. Those that don't live a much better way of life on our benefit system, which is again encouraged by our people in positions of authority. When we start to run out of our people in authority, we immediately see to it that one ethnic or another is put in place to make matters worse. We must be the only country in the world that puts immigrants, whether first or second generation, into positions of power over the laws of the land. Are we totally bonkers? Has the phrase "give them an inch and they take a mile" not reached the ears of the upper echelons of the English? Has the sight of millions of different coloured faces racing to the London sales or shopping in local supermarkets not been a warning enough? Are we happy with entire towns and cities stripped of English shops and English shoppers for what looks like poor imitations of a second-rate bazaar? Are we happy that our children are learning the ways of Islam and not the ways of Christianity? Are we still helping the parasites of the world with an utter contempt for our own poor and needy? What is it with the English? What do they need to stand up and be counted? Is it when their homes will be taken from them? Is it when their children intermarry or bring home little bundles of ethnicities for doting grandad? Is it when their children cannot get jobs because they're the wrong religion or colour in what once was an overall white country? Is it when England finally looks like Doha on a bad day that they will wake up and stop being so bloody liberal minded? Do you have to be a raving fascist to see what's going on? The terms "we are full" was in place in the 80s, never mind the present millennium, and then at least nationalism enjoyed the backing of the people. At least under Thatcher, patriotism raised its head once again, only to die with the following Labour Marxist Blair triumvirate. The axis of evil, as I called it. From my point of view, England has died, or is doing a very good imitation of it. It used to be the most wonderful country, and at the time it was at its zenith, most of us, me included, didn't appreciate it. Abroad was good, abroad was interesting, and like the fairies, once you start not to believe, the thing you believed in dies. And that's what has happened. We have idiots allowing more idiots in, we have guys killing our animals in their own ghastly way and feeding them back to us, but even more terrible than that is the fact that an Englishman is not allowed to protect his land or even have an opinion without being arrested and taken to jail. That is what I resent the upper sheeples for more than anything. More than the genocide they are committing, more than the legal selling off of their country, more than throwing their lot in with a band of political criminals in Europe, that of the suppression of certain opinions and the criminalisation of patriotism. It is as if we are living in a foreign country and we are the immigrants, and that is all wrong, very wrong, and not a pattern for the future. The man in the street who doesn't have the benefit of education cannot be expected to carry the can for a nation lost or divided, and the ones who do have an education owe it to their country to face the music, get their heads out of the sand, albeit imported, and see what's in front of their faces for once. And believe me, it ain't pretty. And finally, the long and short of it. The world's shortest woman visited one of New York City's tallest buildings on Wednesday. 19-year-old Jyoti Amgi, originally from Nagpur, India, took in the view from the observatory deck of the Empire State Building. Ms Amgi was in town to promote the 2014 edition of the Guinness World Records book. The Guinness Book of World Records has given me the opportunity to travel the world, and I've become very popular and very famous, said Amgi in Hindi, through her translator Danish Govindani. She's just 2 feet and a half an inch tall, so small that her picture appears in actual size in the new edition of Guinness World Records. This presenter says she wants to go into movies and just might get there with the state of the world today. Poor little thing, she's also rather plain, and I'm sorry that I have a thing about looking at little people, rather like some people with clowns. Fear and loathing in New York for me, I'm afraid. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe and hopefully a very dry weekend. 24, Justin Maynard 23, Olanre Waju Sonde 24 and Tamsanga Sibanda 30 had originally been charged with 28 offences. They'd been due to stand trial last week, but at the last moment the prosecution revealed that the Twitter account had come to light. Judge John Bevan QC adjourned the case until today and granted all the defendants bail. Today Samantha Cohen, prosecuting, told the court, "A review of the Twitter material has been conducted at the highest level of the Crown Prosecution Service and the police in conjunction with trial counsel. The unanimous conclusion is that there is no realistic prospect of conviction in respect of any defendant on any of the counts. For that reason the Crown is offering no evidence across the board in this case." The judge entered not guilty verdicts on all the charges and discharged the defendants from the dock. World at 8 says, did she have sex with the men or were they falsely accused? If she had sex, no matter how much she led them on, they should have been charged with statutory rape. But of course they aren't old white guys, are they, with drinking problems. Migrants wrongly allowed into the UK, Watchdog warns. Tom Whitehead, security editor for The Telegraph, writes, hundreds of migrant workers may have been wrongly allowed into the UK because of bad decisions by immigration officers, a watchdog has warned. The review is the latest in a series of highly critical reports by the watchdog on the immigration system. 1 in 3 applications for an entrepreneur visa examined by John Vine, the Chief Inspector of Borders, was wrongly granted, his report concluded. He signalled the problem may have been created by an urgency to clear a new immigration backlog of 9,000 cases which emerged last year when applications for entrepreneur visas increased 16-fold in just 10 months. The scale of wrong decisions could even be worse because it was impossible to judge whether correct decisions had been made in almost half the cases examined due to poor paperwork, the report said. Mr Vine also criticised the discovering of crates of files containing sensitive information from applicants in an open plan office in Sheffield. The review is the latest in a series of highly critical reports by the watchdog on the immigration system.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 13th of September 2013. NHS death rate, one of the worst in the West. 9 men accused of sex attacks on girl, 14 released. Migrants wrongly allowed into the UK, watchdog warns. UKIP MEP quits in split with totalitarian Farage. Denmark, Hamas TV to broadcast from Copenhagen Mosque. No Dutch protection for Egyptian Christians. Italy to slash military personnel by 20%. Germany, Muslim schoolgirl loses swimming class appeal. Nick Griffin MEP today talking on Euro arrogance and the experience of improvements. NHS death rates still outstrip those in many other European countries. World at 8 says, this settles the hash of a very self-satisfied Straits-born Chinese nurse who told us in her first words after my husband's heart attack that had he been in the States he would have been dead. Stupid woman. I would have liked to have asked her why she came over here when they need nurses in Singapore. 9 men accused of sex attacks on girl, 14 released. 9 men accused of sex attacks over 6 months on a 14-year-old girl walked free from the Old Bailey today. The case collapsed when police discovered the contents of the alleged victim's old Twitter account. The alleged victim, now 15, made a statement to the police in November last year detailing horrifying sex attacks, mostly rapes, stretching back to May 2012. The men, Desmond Aguiye, 23, Edward Kofi Edunya, 23, Perry Murray, 24, David Sarpong, 23, Adedeji Atidebaby, 21, Austin Odisi, prisoner of the Syrian rebels. Africa's population set to double by 2.4 billion by 2050. Brotherhood imposes jizya tribute on Egypt's Christians. 2 million bikers roar into DC to honour 9/11 protest Muslim rally. Thought for the day: change versus enrichment. And finally, the long and short of it. Dear listeners, keep the comments coming, but try to listen all the way through, as some comments can state facts that I have already covered towards the end of my thoughts. You can't always go on the bullet points alone, they are merely headings. UK news. NHS death rate one of the worst in the West. Sophie Borland of the Daily reports death rates in NHS hospitals are among the highest in the Western world, shock figures revealed recently. British patients were found to be almost 50% more likely to die from poor care than those in America. They have 5 times the chance of dying from pneumonia and twice the chance of being killed by blood poisoning. Experts say that, despite recent